So we're now on Daf Kufyu Tesamid Beis, and Rabbi Yirmiyah has Rav Oshia has the following suffix: Shnei Shomrim Maushi Yitztarif. So you have two Shomrim, and can they combine with the foods that they protect? Right? We need a shear of ochel to be makabel tuma, and that's kibetza. Can we combine two Shomrim? And what's exactly the case here? Hechidomi. Are we talking about a shomer on top of a shomer? Like, for example, you have like an onion peel, and then there's another peel, and on top of that's another peel. So the Gemara says, Umi ika shomer al gabi shomer, right? Can you say that the shomer on top of a shomer also protects the food? What am I going to do with a Mishnah in Uktzin? Vatnan, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Sholosh Klipos Bibatel. There are three peels in that cover and surround an onion. There's what's called the pnimis, which I think is closest to the onion itself. There's emtsois, and then there's the chitzona, which is the outer peel that very easily, falls apart. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer Sholosh Klipos Bibatel Pnimis. Ben Shlema Ben Kidura means like l'kedoach, when you drill in holes. So whether or not the inner onion, which protects the onion, the inner peel, which protects the onion, is full and complete, or it's got holes in it. In any event, mitztarefes. You can integrate it to the onion to set up a shear of ochlin for Kabbalah's tumah, namely a kibetza. The innermost peel is actually edible. Okay, we have to do an experiment here. And therefore it's included in Tumas Ochlin. We really don't need the laws of a shomer. And even if it's torn and does not protect the core of the onion itself, nevertheless it counts towards a kibetza measurement for Tumas Ochlin. And then we get to the emtsa'is, which is the yellow leaf that's on top of those peels that are edible. And this leaf is a peel, right? It's not gufa shel tuma, it's not edible, but it is a protective layer, and therefore it should be a shomer. And apparently it's so tough that even if it is perforated, nevertheless it still has the status of a shomer to protect the onion. However, here we're already down one level. Shlema mitztarefes, but kedura ein mitztarefes. Right, that middle peel has to be intact, without any holes in it. Then we get to the chitzona, ben kach uben kach tahora. The chitzona, which is a shomer on top of a shomer, certainly is not a shomer. Even though I think indirectly it does protect the onion, but legally, according to Allah, it's not considered a shomer. So why did Rav Oshia, did he not know this Mishnah in Uktzin? What was his suffix? So now the Gemara is going to rewrite the text of Rav Oshia. In other words, the case of Rav Oshia of a shomer on top of the shomer is a little bit different than what we thought it was. But rather, shomer ochel shechilko kami boile. So this is a shomer of food that somebody cut into two halves. And apparently he cut the shomer as well. So now half the shomer is protecting half the food. The other half of the shomer is protecting the other portion of the food. But the truth of the matter is that once you cut the shomer in half, it really cannot protect anything. Is therefore, I understand Rav Oshia's first argument, which is lakula, latara, kevan de hailo mogen ahai, hailo mogen ahai. Right, neither half of the shomer can protect that half of the food, and therefore it's tar. They can't combine for tuma. Odilma, what's the second possibility? Lechumra is keva de high magin adidei v'high magin adidei mitztarfin. So let's go back to the first side and try to understand this. Keva de high lo magin ahai. So the mitzias of Rav Oshi's question is that where you cut the shomer in half, the half on, let's call it the left side of the shomer, has no protective impact on the half on the right side, and vice versa. Or do you say, according to Rav Oshia, shall we say that it's enough that each half of the shomer protects that half of the food? Tashma. The Gemara wants to resolve this from a Mishnah in Uktzin. And again, let's just go over the beginning part of the Mishnah, which is not printed in the Gemara. You have a pod, which is a sharbit that has beans inside of it, and you emptied out the sharbit. And now it depends. Is it susceptible to tumanat? If he leaves in one single bean, then the sharbit is susceptible to tuma, according to Tanakam. Now, the Mishnah quotes Rabbi Lozman Azariah Mitar b'shel pul umitame b'shel kitnis. It depends what kind of peas or beans are in the sharbit in the pot. If it's a sharbit of a large bean, which is called a pull, then it's tahor. Why? Because he emptied out the bean from the pod. And even if what you're left with is, but I meant to say, if you're left with inside the pod kitnis, which is a small bean, then since the owner desires that the sharbitim will cover the beans, and the small beans will not be touched, therefore they serve as shomrim, and they combine with the beans for tumah. I mean, keep in mind that the sharbit does not measure a kibetza. So it must mean that Rabbi Lozman Azariah is saying that several sharbitim with their beans can be combined to generate or to equal a kibetza for minimum requirement for tumas ochlin. Anyway, we see that each of the two shomer protects a very small measure of food, and they combine for food tumah, for tumas ochlin. So would this prove that at the end of the day, in Rav Oshia's he doubts it this way or that way. So we can now assume and answer his question that two shomrim even though each one protects a small measure, shu, they combine for tumah. No, the Gemara says there's no proof. Amar of Acha Brederova Bikulcha umishum yad. The discussion in the Mishnah is not about a shomer, it's about a yad. And we're not talking about the pod, but rather the stem that holds all the pods together. The stem itself is makabel tumah because it's a yad. Umay b'mashmishon. And what did the Brisa mean when it said b'mashmishon? Which means, that it protects, is b'tashmishon, right? He has benefit from the service of the stems because with the stem, he can pick up all the pods. Toshma. So again, right now, the Gemara has no proof. The Gemara has not reconciled Rabbi Oshia's vacillation. But the Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel, we have a Brisa Rabbi Shmuel, Al Kol Zera Zaru Asher Yizora. We had this already twice, I think. Kiderech Shebnei Adam Motziim Lizriya. Right, we take out the various kernels for planting with their husk. Chito b'klipasa, sior b'klipasa, doshim b'klipasan. And the Tana says that if inside the husk there are several kernels, we can combine them in order to comprise the measure needed for food tumah. So we see that two shomrim, each protecting a small measure of food, can be combined for tumas ochlin. So Gemara rejects. Kidomer of Acha Brei Derav, as we had before, we're not talking about shomrim, like the husks, to combine several kernels in the husk, but rather bekulcha. We're dealing with the stem, so we're dealing with yad, not with shomer. Bekulcha umishum yad, explicit. Is hachenami here too in the Brisa b'shidra umishum shomer. Now there's a spine. We need a little bit of a diagram here. The kernels are attached to the spine. Just like we had the kulcha, which was the stem in the case of the pods. Here we have the shidra, which is the spine. Anyway, we have a whole ear of grain, and it's susceptible to tumah under the law of a shomer. So he says the following, just as Rav Acha explained above that the Mishnah deals with a stem that is a single yad for all the pods, so too we can explain the Brisa that deals with a whole ear of grain that is a single shomer for all the kernels on it. An ear of grain has numerous kernels arranged around it in several rings, one above the other, with bristles interspersed among them. The tight arrangement of the kernels and the bristles causes them to be held in place. Again, we need a little bit more of a diagram here. Anyway, since if even one kernel would fall out, the entire arrangement would collapse, the whole ear, kernels, bristles, and husks, is considered a single shomer for all the individual kernels. So the Brisa has no source for the notion that several shomer can be combined for tumah, because basically we have one shomer that holds everything in place, the kernels, the bristles, and the husks. So all the parts of the ear of the grain together are considered a single shomer for all the kernels. So the Gemara is not so happy with this. I understand that the upper kernels depend upon the lower kernels, because if you pull out the lower kernels, the upper kernels would fall down. Why do the lower kernels, why do they depend upon the upper ones? Remove the upper ones and you're still left intact with the lower ones. If the upper husks fall off, the lower husks and kernels remain intact. The upper husks cannot be considered shomrim of the lower kernels. And yet the Brisa teaches that the upper husks combine with the lower husks and kernels combine the measure needed for tumas ochlin. And the word answers bechad dara. Okay, this is going to be an ongoing discussion here. Bechad dara means one row. So there's one row of the ear, and all the kernels on one row are called chad dara. And collectively, they constitute a single shomer. All the kernels on each row are interdependent. They depend one upon the other. And these kernels combine to comprise the kibetza volume minimum for the shear of tumas ochlin. Umika kibetza ochlin bechad dara. Is there such a powerful, wheat kernel that you could find an egg's volume in one single row of kernels? And the word says, yes, you can. Bechite de Shimon ben Shetach. Apparently, Shimon ben Shetach lived at a time of great wealth because there was abundant rainfall, such that the wheat kernels grew as large as kidneys. Now, if you're already, giving this explanation that we're talking about the times of Shimon ben Shetach, is chadachita nami. Even you have a single wheat kernel, bechite de Shimon ben Shetach, but you have the size of the wheat kernels of Shimon ben Shetach, where the kernels were as large as kidneys. I think they mean human kidneys. So you don't have to explain the Brisa as referring to all the kernels in a single row, which are collectively viewed as a shomer. No, it means simply that a single large wheat kernel combines with its husk to comprise the kibetza needed for tumas ochlin. So at the end of the day, the sugya ends without any resolution. So we don't know whether two shomrim can combine with their foods and if these shomrim combine, they comprise the kibetza. He points out that the Rambam, to our surprise, says that two shomrim don't combine for tumah. That doesn't make any sense because the Gemara leaves it as a suffix, and we're dealing with a suffix shel Torah, suffix d'oraisa l'chumra. So that Rambam has to be into a gufa. Let's go back to the Brisa that we had on Kuf Yud Ches. Shnei atzomos. V'aleim shnei chatzoi zeisim. V'hichnis rasheim shnayim lebayis. V'abayis mayel aleihem. Abayis tome according to Tanakama. The bayis is tome. Even though the ends of the bones that have flesh attached to it are outside the oil. Yehuda ben Akusa Omer Mishum Rabbi Yaakov Heich Shnei Atzamos Mitztarfen L'Kezayis. Right, in order to have tumas oil, you need a kezayis worth of the flesh of the corpse. And how can you combine two bones to comprise an olive's worth of flesh? So So he points out here that the Tanoim disagree only regarding the case of half of an olive's volume. They agree that when there is an olive's volume of flesh, the bones serve as a yad to bring the tumah into the house. So that there's no question that the bone could serve as a yad, but that's only if you have a kizayis of basar. But if you have a half a kizayis of basar on each of two atzamos, then we have the machlok shin Tanakama and Yehuda. Reish Lakish lo shanu ela etzem daviyad. What qualifies as a yad? An etzem, where you could pick up the bone and the ochel, the flesh that's attached to the bone, will be lifted. Aval nema, but a strand of hair, where if you rip pilk, it doesn't have the weight to serve as a yad and lift up the flesh, is therefore, it doesn't qualify as a yad. Sounds very logical. But yet Rabbi Yochanan Omer, afilu nema nami haviyad. And therefore the tumah can be brought into the house through this strand of hair, which is considered a yad. Reish Lakish maintains that a single strand of lead is not considered yad. If he would attempt to lift the flesh by its hair, the hair would tear apart. The hair is considered a shomer, but not a yad. Now, with regard to a shomer of nevela, it really has the same status and law as a yad and exports tumah, but it cannot combine for tumah. Nevertheless, in one sense, a yad is more stringent than a shomer. This is a Gemara that we didn't really study in depth back on Kuf Yud Ches. Only the portion of the hide that is directly opposite the meat is considered a shomer. The same applies to a hair. Only that which is attached to the hide directly opposite the meat is its shomer. However, this qualification does not pertain to a yad, since anything that is attached to an object can theoretically serve as a handle. Thus, if we would consider the hair as a yad, then even the hair at the other end of the hide would qualify. Reish Lakish teaches that a strand of hair is not a yad, and accordingly the hair that is not directly opposite the flesh cannot bring the tumah into the house. Rabbi Yochanan Omar, afilu nema nami aviyad, even a strand of hair that is attached to part of the hide that's not directly opposite the flesh, because then we said that even Reish Lakish would agree it's tomei, can bring tumah into the house. Maybe he's talking about a thick hair that's strong enough to lift some of the flesh. I don't know. But anyway, Eisvei Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, I'm going to prove that a strand of hair is a yad from a Mishnah later on in Masechta Chullin, or sheyesh lav kizayis basar, hanogeh b'tziv hayotze mimenu. Right, there's a sliver of meat that protrudes from this hide. Ubisara shekenegdo, that's the most important part, the hair that is growing from the hide opposite the meat, tameh. Now, if we assume we're dealing with a yad, then this would disprove Reish Lakish's shita, who says that a hair cannot be a yad. So one says, lo, we're not dealing with a yad, we're dealing with a shomer. The strand of hair is considered a shomer. So now the Gemara asks, Umi ika shomer al gabi shomer. The hair is atop the hide, and the hide protects the meat. The hair is a shomer on top of a shomer. But Umi ika, is there such a halachic status as a shomer al gabi shomer? And Reish Lakish says yes, but not because it's a shomer agabi shomer, but because it's a direct shomer. Chilchule mechalchel. Okay, we'll see what that means in just a second. Let me just. So we have the answer of Reish Lakish, Chilchule mechalkel. So what does this mean? The hair pierces the hide and reaches the meat beneath it. So therefore, it's a direct shomer onto the meat, and it's not a shomer agavi shomer. Maskif lo Rav Acha Bar Yaakov. Elameatu tefillin hechi kasvinan. Right. With regard to tefillin, we have a halacha of ksiva tama, so that the ink should not be sinking down into the cracks of the parchment. Now, if you're telling me that there are hairs that pierce through the hide, then the ink is now going to go into that, that hole, so to speak, where the hair pierced the hide, which is now the cloth, the parchment, and therefore you don't have ksiva tama. And the Gemara says, what are you talking about? Is to me to say, did you forget Hadi Amri Marova? They say in Eretz Yisrael called Nekev Shadio over all of Eno Nekev. In other words, this hole is so microscopic that the ink can actually pass over the hole without going into the hole. The hole is so small that the vicious ink does not sink into the hole. I'm not familiar with that word, vicious. Okay. Ibai, same or another answer. Now, we're going to offer an sort of answer to Rabbi Yochanan's challenge from the Mishnah. Kule Mishum Yat. The Mishnah deals with Tuma under the category of Yat. And a strand of hair is considered a Yat, like a sliver of meat. But what's the case of a hair that can serve as a Yad? In other words, there are a lot of hairs together. Right? There's strands amongst many strands. And therefore, they can, since there's a bunch of hairs, that's a Yad Y, collectively, as a bunch together, I don't know if you tie them in a bundle, but they're strong enough to hold the meat. They're not going to rip, as we said before. So Gemara says, "V'heicha itmar de Rabbi Eloi." We said that Rabbi Eloi had interpreted the case that we're dealing with a bristle amongst many bristles. What was that case? Aha. So this is the Mishnah that we had before in Uktzin. Melai shebeshibolin, the bristles of ears of grain, mitamin mitamin, right? They acquire tumah, umitamin, and they convey tumah. V'eino mitzarfen. They don't combine to comprise the kibetza that we need for tumas ochlin. Each bristle is considered a yad of the ear, but not a shomer. So I don't get it. What are you talking about? Melai lemai chazi? You're talking about melai, the bristles of the ears of the grain. What is a single bristle fit for? Right? Certainly, if you grab onto it, it's going to rip. We're not talking about one single bristle, but it's a bristle amongst many bristles, and one could lift the ear by grasping all the bristles, and therefore each and every one is considered part of a yad. Others have a different version. Rabbi Yochanan challenged Reish Lakish from the Mishnah, which states that a hair protruding from the hide of an avela can transmit tum, presumed because it's a yad. Reish Lakish finds it's a shomer. Reish Lakish then bolstered the explanation as follows: "Stabri de mishum shomer, disal gedaitu mishum yad, nema achas lamai chazi." Right? How can you grasp onto one single hair and make it into a shomer? Kida omra viloi b'malai sheben abloim hachinami b'nema sheben hanimin. It's a whole group of strands of hair. Vehecha itmar to Rabbi Loza, to Rabbi Loi. Where was it said? Aha, tisnan avloi shav shibolin mitam veda mitztarfin. Right, so the bristles of ears of grain can acquire tumah and convey tumah, but they don't combine for the measurement required for tumah. And the reason for that is that each bristle is considered a yad and not a shomer. Malai de malai chazi. You know, if you have a bristle, a single bristle, what's it good for? You know, it's going to tear. Rabbi Eloi ben Elisha ben Amaloim, it's a bristle amongst many bristles. And those who have the machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish Amasnisin, regard to Mishnah Va'orva Rot V'Kipa, Mitztarfin L'Tami Tumas Ochan. Omar Rish Lakish Lo Shanu Ele Etzem Tavi Shomer Aval Nemo Lo Havi Shomer, and therefore it cannot combine to comprise the required measurement of a kibbutz. Rabbi Yochanan Omar Afilu Nema Nami Havi Shomer. In other words, the Nemo, I guess, is going to be a shomer for the hide, which in terms is a shomer for the meat. And Rabbi Yochanan Mika Shomer al Gabi Shomer, is such a thing as a shomer on top of a shomer, and we have the same answer again. Chalchule Mechalchel. Right, the hair will pierce the hide and reach the meat directly. So it's a shomer of the meat itself and not a shomer on top of a shomer. This will stop here on Daf Kuf Chaf. Right, Daf Kuf Chaf. And